Yes, thank you, Cort. So this finding suggests that there is an actual structural change going on in the brain that is associated with modulating the default mode via the prefrontal cortex, which is part of another network that we call the central executive network. And so this is the first evidence that we have that really small doses of meditation that are obtained through the Healthy Minds program are actually doing something beneficial to the brain in a relatively short period of time.
So, Richie, I just got back from London, literally like 12 hours ago. And while I was there, I was meeting with a new friend. He told me a personal experience that he was in the middle of that is something I've heard many times over the years. And it relates very directly to some research that we've been doing at the center around what we call, in scientific terms, the dosage of meditation. So he was just talking about his interest in getting a meditation practice going, and it was clear that he was kind of frustrated with himself and finding it hard to get going. So we talked about it, and he basically said, I'm just really busy these days. I've got a very hectic lifestyle. I'm trying to set things aside, and I'm just not finding the space for it. And I could hear that the way he was viewing it was like meditation was this huge all consuming thing, and you need to have tons of time and space in your life, which pretty much none of us actually have. And he was not getting going because he kind of felt like he needed these ideal conditions. And so we talked about it, and I said, look, it doesn't have to be a big heavy thing. It can be literally a few minutes after you brush your teeth in the morning, or a few minutes before you go to bed, or it could actually just be an active meditation that you do when you're commuting to work. It literally can just be something you do anytime, anywhere, or as you have been saying, every time, everywhere, with everything. But this got me thinking about the research that we've been doing on dosage, which is really interesting. Basically, the question of how much meditation do you really need to do to see all of the remarkable benefits we see. So we've had a couple studies coming out recently. Our friend and colleague Simon Goldberg has been at the center of this research. But maybe we could just start with a high level summary, and if you could share what we're finding from a scientific point of view, and then we can just riff on this theme and talk about the meditative perspective as well. So what's the science? What's the most cutting edge science saying these days?
Yeah. So thank you for that great introduction, Cort. And let me begin by saying that this issue of dosage actually is one that has perennially been important to research on meditation. When I think back across my career, the very first randomized controlled trial um, that our group was involved with in looking at meditation. This was a randomized controlled trial of mindfulness-based stress reduction that was actually co-authored by John Kabat-Zinn and published in 2003.
This was
Which
the immune system response paper.
Yes, the immune system response paper, which is actually my most highly cited scientific paper.
That's
I
amazing.
won't, yeah, and I think it simply has to do, not that it's such a
Yeah, I know
fantastic
it's not. I know
study,
it's not your. Yeah, I know it's not your favorite study, but obviously a
but
super
it,
important, influential paper in the role of head of the
yeah,
field.
it was, yeah, it was done at the right time. But what we examined in that paper, the relationship between dosage and outcomes, and we had a variety of outcomes in terms of brain responses, immune responses,
And this was
changes.
am I remembering correctly? This was the flu vaccine and looking at how the body responds when vaccinated.
Yeah, so this was a study done with employees of a high-tech corporation, actually here in Madison, Wisconsin, who were stressed in the ways middle class people have reported being stressed, balancing the demands of work and family. And it was looking at an 8-week standard mindfulness based stress reduction course on a range of outcomes, including brain activity, immune responses, and a host of psychological characteristics. And we examined every every possible outcome in relation to dose, and this in this case it was dose in terms of the number of minutes of meditation practice that participants were reporting each day as they were going through this 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And it is standard in MBSR to request that participants do 45 minutes of meditation practice 6 days a week. That's the standard ask, if you will, in terms of dosage. And the range of reported dosage went from about 0 minutes. There were quite a few people that reported 0 minutes. So we believe people were reporting honestly. And it went up to, close to 45 minutes a day for this 8-week period. And what we found in that paper is no relationship. That is,
Wow.
across all these different outcomes, we were not able to detect any significant association between dosage and outcome. And this was one of the early clues that, at least looking at dosage in this kind of way, and looking at the kind of outcomes that we're looking at from pre to post this 8-week period, there were not any robust associations that were emerging. So that was kind of an early data point, and we've been periodically looking at this ever since. And in some work, we have found some associations, particularly with long-term practitioners, where we look at the relationship between the number of lifetime hours of practice that we derive from a very detailed, structured interview that we do with participants about their lifetime practice. But in other studies with beginning meditators, we have mostly come up with findings that are quite similar to the finding that we first obtained in 2003. And in the recent papers that you've been referring to, Cort, that we have published together as part of work that we've been doing with the Healthy Minds program, uh, uh, a um, a program uh, that Healthy Minds Innovations, the nonprofit that we both are associated with, has produced, and that you have been the principal architect of. Um,
And
when
just
we
a footnote, if any of you are listening are not familiar with the Healthy Minds program app, completely free. You can go and download it and try it out for yourself. So a lot of the research we're going to talk about today is it's basically done on this app that's freely available, and that both we and many other research teams around the world have now done research on. So just a quick interjection there.
Yeah, thank you, Cort. So, and one of the cool things about using an app-based practice, in this case, particularly one that we created, is we can get the back-end data, so to speak. And
Yeah, we
so,
know exactly how much people really meditated, which is
well, we
harder to
know
do.
how much people listen, so at least.
Yeah, that's a good
Uh,
point. We know how
so,
much they are playing a guided meditation. I guess that's
right.
a good point. We don't know how much of the time they're actually meditating.
Yeah. So in
Good
any
distinction.
case, we've been looking at it in those kinds of ways, and we have a lot of data here. So this is not like our early study. The 2003 study that I was referring to earlier had a sample size of around 45 people. We're talking here about sample sizes in the multiple hundreds. One of the papers that you were referring to, Court, it has a sample size of around 800 people. So these are large studies, and what we're seeing in these studies is, for the most part, with conventional kinds of outcome measures, where we are looking, for example, at measures of well-being, or measures of depression, or measures of anxiety or stress, and we're looking at changes from before to after, say, 1 month of practice with the Healthy Minds program, that using various metrics, including the number of minutes they are listening to practices, or
Like the number
Is
of days on which somebody does an activity is another metric, right?
another metric. And for the most part, we are not seeing any robust associations between the amount of practice that people are doing and outcome. We've also looked at the density of practice. And so, for example, if a person is allocating, let's say, 20 minutes a day to practice meditation, do they derive more benefit if they do that in a single 20-minute period or in two 10-minute periods that are spaced out across the day? And of course, there are many more variants of that which could be studied. We only, in this case, studied the two extremes, that is doing, or not necessarily the two extremes, but two variants, one 20-minute period and two 10-minute periods. It's possible to think about this as 10 2-minute periods that are sprinkled throughout the day. And that's something we just haven't had the opportunity to look at yet. And so in the study that we did comparing the one 20-minute period to the two 10-minute periods, there were no differences. It didn't matter. And so these are all really interesting data points that suggest that maybe in the early stages of practice, there is not a robust association between these metrics of dosage and the kinds of outcomes we've been looking at. There is a hint in some of the work that we've been doing that if you look at momentary measures, a kind of measurement that we call in the trade experience sampling or ecological momentary assessment, where we ping people and ask, how are you feeling right now? When we get those kinds of measures,
And just to contrast that with other measures we use, they're more retrospective, like how attentive are you in your daily life generally? So you're kind of looking at your life as this sort of global judgment, where what you're talking about now, it's much more, it's not like kind of generally how attentive are you, or generally how much empathy or connection do you feel. It's really how much do you feel right now in this very moment, and it's interesting that you just see a different signal depending on how you ask the question.
yeah, exactly. And so it's not just how you ask the question, but it's really how the question is directing you to make inferences about your own mental state. And in one case, you're really reporting in the moment, just how you are experiencing things. And in the other case, you're really asked to retrospectively make a judgment, if you will, about how things have been, for example, in the last 2 weeks or the last week. Very different kind of psychological process that is being requested. And so with the momentary assessments, there is a little bit of signal to suggest that that people do respond more favorably with higher dosage of meditation. And it may be that over a longer period of time, that those momentary benefits do show some cumulative benefit that may show up on these retrospective measures. Now, having said all this, let me just add one other data point, and this is for you folks listening, really hot off the press. It's not yet published. It's super exciting. And it's from a new project that we're doing. And it's a very complex project, and it has a lot of different components. And I'll only share one little tidbit here. It would take quite a bit of time to go through what the entire project is about, but we have in this project our first opportunity to look at the impact of engaging with the Healthy Minds program on changes in brain function and structure. So we're doing MRI scans before and after people do the foundation course, which is a 4-week, 28-day course where they go through each of the four pillars of well-being in our framework: awareness, connection, insight, and purpose. And they allocate 1 week to each of these four pillars. And one of the amazing things that we're seeing is that looking at simply the number of days that people are using the program, that's the measure here. They are asked to use it every day, but people do not use it every day. And there's a range from using it about uh, a little less than half of the number of days that were prescribed up to every day during this 28-day period. And so there's a big range. This is a sample of it's not a huge sample because we were doing MRI scans before and after and a lot of other kinds of measurements. So this was a super measurement intensive study. People had to come into the lab on multiple occasions. And so the sample size is around 45 people. But in this case, we are seeing that people who report, who not report, but from we get this data directly from the app, who have more days of engagement in the Healthy Minds program are showing a bigger change in a measure of structural connectivity in the brain. And this is specifically a measure of the integrity of a major pathway, and the technical term for this is the superior longitudinal fasciculus. I don't expect any of you to remember that, but it's a pathway that connects the prefrontal cortex to the back of the brain, and particularly an area in the back of the brain that's really important in the default mode that we call the precuneus. And this is the
And
major path.
just to interject one little point for those of you who've been following along with previous episodes, or you're just up to speed with some neuroscientific findings in this area. The default mode network, this is the network associated with thought activity. So if you're ruminating, you're thinking about yourself, especially self-referential thought. So that this connection, just to put it in context of experience, this is that kind of, mind wandering, self-referential thought, rumination. This is all happening in this particular network that Richie's talking about.
Yeah, so thank you, Cort. So this finding suggests that there is an actual structural change going on in the brain that is associated with modulating the default mode via the prefrontal cortex, which is part of another network that we call the central executive network, a really important network that is implicated in self-regulation that we know is impacted by meditation practices. And so this is the first evidence that we have that really small doses of meditation that are obtained through the Healthy Minds program are actually doing something beneficial to the brain in a relatively short period of time. So to summarize, the data are mixed. There's not a lot of evidence that dosage really matters a lot in the very beginning. The findings that we do have show two things. One is that dosage seems to matter for momentary changes in our emotions and in our awareness that we get from ecological momentary assessment. And there's some evidence to suggest, really new evidence, that there may be this really interesting structural change in the brain that is associated with modulation of the default mode.
So this is really cool. That's a great overview. Thanks for summarizing. That's basically summarizing like 20 years of research in a few minutes. So thank you for all of that overview. It was interesting, as I was thinking about our conversation today, I was reflecting on all of the classical meditation manuals that I've worked on and read. And as you know, I've translated all these ancient Tibetan manuscripts, some of the most well-known meditation manuals in the Tibetan tradition. I've certainly studied many of them. I don't remember a single instance where those meditation manuals that have stood the test of time, sometimes for more than 1,000 years, talk about the minutes, the amount of time, the specific amount of time you should meditate for. I literally don't remember a single one. I don't think it comes up. What you do find, I would say, are a few things that very much align with some of the points you were making, Richie. One, and actually this is one thing that I hear you say all the time. One is this idea of short times, many times. We think about meditation as this huge thing, and I hear that all the time, like, oh, it's this big thing. I don't have time for it. But actually, like right now, we're sitting here as I'm talking. I am bringing awareness to my body and my breath. I can feel the movement in my body. I can feel the air coming in and out of my body as I speak and as I breathe. You sitting there, Richie, or any of you listening, you're not even stopping what you're doing. You're simply just changing what's going on in your own mind. And suddenly this is meditation. You don't even stop what you're doing. So that idea that it doesn't have to be an hour, a half an hour, even 20 minutes, it can be little moments of awareness, little moments of kindness, appreciation scattered throughout your day. And actually, that's what you really hear about in these meditation manuals. It's really just this idea of scattering moments of connection, awareness, insight, whatever it might be throughout your day. You see that a lot. The other thing that you hear is an idea that I rarely hear spoken of in more contemporary mindfulness and meditation contexts, but is this idea of ending your meditation on a good note. And I always think of the parallel of beginning to work out. And I feel like what oftentimes happens is, we think we should meditate for some period of time, like I should meditate for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. If you haven't meditated before, that's actually, that's kind of a lot. If you think about it from the brain networks you're activating, the mental and psychological processes that you're bringing online. It's not easy. And it would be like if you were going to the gym and you haven't worked out before and you suddenly hop on a treadmill and you'll get tired right away. You won't be able to do it that long. With meditation, I feel like we try to stay on the treadmill way too long. And it's like we're just barely, we're practically dragging ourselves along and we're clearly tired, clearly exhausted. Clearly it's time to take a break. But we think, oh, I should do this for 20 minutes. So I got to keep going. In the Tibetan tradition in particular, oftentimes it says you shouldn't think so much about the time and the length. Just end it on a good note. End it when it's feeling good. So you want to come back and do it again. That might be 3 minutes. It might be 5 minutes. It might be 10 minutes. So just end on that peak note. And we can talk about some of the little tips you have in the tradition, the little mini practices that you integrate into it. So I'm just curious how that lines up with the science, because it's not, I feel like we tend to just naturally think about duration and like longer is better, where in the tradition, I feel like actually you don't find that at all, really.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful reminder, Court, and so important. And in my own journey as a meditator myself, this is an issue that's so important. And I practiced for many years in a tradition where, it was more kind of meditation boot camp. You had to put your hours in and just sort of you struggled through it.
Yeah, you just grind it out and,
Yeah,
I mean, there
you
could be some
must.
benefit. You get some grit, you'd probably
Yeah,
develop some.
yeah, and I think there was probably some benefit, but when I began to practice in the Tibetan tradition and in the way that you're describing, and really, one of the things that our teacher Mingyur Rinpoche often talks about is really making friends with your mind and not treating it as something to struggle with. It's such a simple and helpful kind of instruction. And so
And at the
if
same time, it's such a game changer, and it's so antithetical to how we usually relate to our own minds. I don't think
totally.
most of us even realize it. We're so adversarial with ourselves. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, but we are.
Yeah, totally. One of the studies that I'd love to do at some point, to the best of my knowledge, this has never been done. So if any scientist is watching this podcast, please feel free to steal this idea. But is to compare a a condition where you have people meditating for a certain length of time whatever it is, say 15 minutes, it could be anything, versus another group where you tell them to stop meditating whenever they feel they should stop. There
Mm,
is no specific time limit, but the moment they start feeling restless, just get up and stop meditating. And you can, of course, compute the number of minutes each of them is meditating. And my guess is that the group that is invited to stop meditating whenever they feel restless and should stop, that they're likely to spend fewer minutes meditating, but may actually have more benefit.
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's a study that really is crying out to be done.
Yeah, that would be so cool. And another thing that I know you're well aware of, Richie, and it's such a powerful thing that I never hear it framed this way in the Tibetan tradition, but it clearly is these little things you can do in your practice that dramatically change your interests, your level of engagement, your motivation to want to keep doing it. Is you can do little things to bookend your practice that naturally will create a little burst of interest, inspiration, positive motivation. So, I mean, actually, you and I did this right before we even started hit record on this. We actually just paused for a minute. We did this very practice where you just pause and you think to yourself, why am I doing this? So it could be your meditation. You actually can do this for anything in your life, but in this case, we did it before we started recording. You can do it when you sit down to meditate. And you try to form the most positive, uplifting, aspirational motivation you could possibly think of. So in the Tibetan tradition, you always hear this phrase, for the benefit of all beings. You literally try to think, I want this to help everyone anywhere in the planet, anywhere in the universe. May this just ripple out, whether directly or indirectly. I have no idea how this would happen, but somehow may this ripple out and bring well-being, peace of mind, happiness, whatever you can think of to the lives of others. And so you think of that. You can think of specific people. You can think of groups of people. You can think of people who might be suffering and may this support them somehow. You can just use your imagination, but the whole idea is just make it as vast and aspirational as possible. And then you come into the activity, you're just kind of fired up. And it's not like me, me, me. It's not like, what am I going to get out of this? It has this way of, you're not even thinking about it, but it just subtracts all of the stickiness of the self and all of our own needs and where we get caught up. And we're just thinking of doing good in the world. And then you end the meditation on the same way. You just end with another moment of aspiration. And so you start and you end in an inspired frame of mind. And that actually, in some ways, is almost the most important part of the practice, maybe more important than whatever happens in between. So we should do that study too. That would be another one that would, tweak that.
Absolutely. And that's super, super important. And, full disclosure, Cort and I have been doing that practice every time before we begin an episode of Dharma Lab. And it's just part of our regular practice. And let me just say something about the end practice and sandwiching our meditation between this aspiration at the beginning and at the end. We do what we often call a dedication, where we reflect on whatever benefit or insights we may have gleaned from our time together, and how we can bring it out in the world in a way that would benefit the most people. And one of the cool things that I've been reflecting on is Danny Kahneman, the famous psychologist and behavioral economist who won the Nobel Prize in economics and died very recently. One of the things that Danny was well known for is what he called the peak end rule. And what the peak end rule is that what we remember about an experience is dominated by the peak of the experience, whatever that might be. Thank you, Cort. And what happens right at the end. And
So like
there's
an
a
emotional peak, it could have like in the middle of your meditation, for example, you just have a memory or a thought or something that just inspires you, like in the midst of it, right? It could be
Yeah,
anything, but
it
for
could be
example.
anything. Right. And then what happens right at the end?
Hmm.
And so, if we end with a period of frustration, that's going to dominate our recollection of the experience. But in this framework, what we're ending with is the aspiration that whatever we have gleaned, we're dedicating to the benefit of others. It's an altruistic aspiration, motivation. And when we end with that, it really helps in coloring, if you will, the experience in this very positive way, and is very consistent, excuse me, with Danny Kahneman's understanding of how we remember our emotional experiences.
Yeah, these little things are so helpful because they only take a moment to do. I mean, if you take a few moments at the beginning, as we said, or Richie, as you just said, you dedicate your practice at the end. Again, it's just a few moments, but you have now created a little burst of inspiration, and that's what you'll recall later. So the next day, you're not going to remember how restless and bored you were and how tedious it might have felt at a certain point. You're going to remember that moment of inspiration and this idea, the motivation to be a benefit in the world and how it feels internally to be in that space. You walk into whatever you're doing next in your day, you're just kind of already thinking of wanting to do good and to help the people you interact with. So it creates a little kind of positive loop around the practice. So it's just kind of funny. Even the way we do research is so much focused on like the dosage, like how much do we need to do? Because that's a question we all ask. Like, how much do I really need to do? It's almost like we're asking the wrong question. Because what the data is showing is maybe the duration isn't really the key thing we need to focus on. It's more how we can create the inspiration, the interest, these inner circumstances, so the momentum will naturally carry us. And then whether it was 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes, at some point that might matter, but probably at the beginning, it's as you say, the most important practice is the one you'll actually do. So the question is, how do you create the circumstances so you want to keep practicing? So the motivation, it's going to carry you through all the ups and downs and the busyness of your life.
Yes, I think that's a great summary, Court.
So maybe just a final note here. I'm curious, you've meditated since the early 70s. I started meditating in the early 90s when I was stressed out college student. I imagine your practice in terms of how much you've practiced, when you've practiced, how you've practiced, I imagine that's changed tremendously over the years. I don't know if you could just want to share how that's been for you or any lessons learned.
Yeah, it is absolutely. I mean, there was a time, excuse me, there was a time in my life when I would get very anxious if I didn't practice, or practiced very little for some reason. If I had an early morning flight or a very early morning meeting, and I needed to get in my hour in the morning, and if I didn't, it would really upset me. And one of the changes has been in that. And so now, I enjoy long practices, and I try to arrange my life so at least a few days a week, 3 or 4 days a week, I can do a long practice, but other days might be a much shorter practice, and it's okay. I practice every day, no matter what. That's been constant, but I am much less impacted by the variation in that practice. Uh, and so that's one really important change that's occurred. The other thing uh, that has really helped me is being much more intentional, or I shouldn't say intentional. It's really simply being aware of just a plethora of opportunities for practicing throughout the day. And I travel a lot, and so um, I was flying back from California yesterday, and as I was walking through the Minneapolis airport on my way back from California. I very it just occurs spontaneously when I'm
We should
looking
check
at.
when I was in the Minneapolis airport yesterday. Maybe we cross paths.
Yeah, I knew you were there. I think I was there earlier. I was there right around noon,
Oh, okay.
or
Yeah, I was there later.
1 o'clock, 1 p.m. Central Time. And I was just very aware of looking at people's faces, and just I was seeing a lot of stress faces, and just trying to wish everyone some ease in their travels, and just in my mind, smiling at people, and just little things of that sort, but really being aware of it, and it's amazing how it does impact your immediate experience. And this, by the way, is where measures like experience sampling. If I was asked right in the moment how I'm feeling, I'm in the middle of traveling. I got up at 4:30 in the morning in California to make this flight at 6:15, and I was feeling pretty good, and feeling very connected to people. I was a little tired, and that was okay. And I did a short practice on the plane,
Yeah,
but
me too. I was practicing on the plane yesterday as well.
yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean, yeah. Yeah, just to round it out, I mean, I've had a very similar experience. Been meditating more than 30 years, and my practice has been up and down. And I've had more or less time to practice. From periods. A couple months ago, I was, spent 2 months on retreat where I'm practicing like 12 hours a day, and then times where I might have 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes. I remember a particularly meaningful period that always stands out in my mind is when my son was born. And prior to that, I'd been doing tons of practice. It was a period where I was practicing very deeply and intensively. I was living in Asia and really, really, really devoted to my practice. And then suddenly I have this baby that I'm caring for. And suddenly my practice was when I would put him down for a nap every day. For 3 years, I literally lay down with him for every nap he ever took. I was fortunate to be working at home. And that was like my meditation. It was like doing a little love meditation, just lying next to him as he was lying down for his nap. Like that was maybe one of those most meaningful periods of meditation practice. But it didn't look like me sitting in a cushion with, a stick of incense in a quiet room. It was me just lying on my bed as a little baby was going to sleep next to me. But yeah, it can be all these little moments. It can look like many different things. But I think that, just to distill both the research, the contemplative wisdom, is that really it's about what motivates you, what's going to get you to stay engaged with your practice. And that might be 5 minutes, it might be 2 minutes. It's more kind of what you put into the practice than how long it is that really matters. So things like compassion, appreciation, all these little things that will energize and motivate your practice are really what matters. So it's much more of an exploration and just see what works for you. So really cool research, really cool to hear, especially that new finding. Actually, I myself just heard about this new finding that Richie mentioned, the connection between the default mode network and the executive network. So I myself just got a little update along with the rest of you. So great discussion. Thanks, Richie, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And hopefully we'll see you soon for another episode of Dharma Lab.